So next up we have Candice, who's here with us on set. Candice, whenever you're ready, please tell us your story.
Sure. I've actually had 2 abortions, and they were both really different, probably night and day compared to each other. The first one was when I was barely 20. I had been pretty unstable. I grew up raising kind of myself, and so when you make the mistakes that teenagers do, you know, you don't have the safety net. Been couch surfing a lot, had gotten my first job, and had been dating somebody for about 3 weeks when we got pregnant. I lived in Seattle, where everybody's pro-choice kind of as a default, right? So I had, you know, no pushback from anybody when I decided to get an abortion. I was able to be very open about it. I went to the clinic. I, you know, had no regrets. Everybody was very supportive of my life. I actually ended up marrying the man who I had gotten pregnant with, and we were married for a few years, and then he got transferred to Dallas, which is kind of where my real story starts. So we moved to Dallas, very quickly realized that we probably shouldn't be married anymore, separated. When we had been married, we had decided that we didn't want children. And so when we first got there, I had actually been talking to my OBGYN about getting permanent birth control because kids probably weren't in our future. When I first went to her with that, she said, you know, I'm a little concerned that your husband might change his mind, so why don't we wait 6 months? And we waited, and then 6 months later, she said, you know, why don't we give you a Mirena, which is the 5-year IUD? And in my head, I thought, okay, well, that's really not the solution that I want, but it'll do for now. Later, when Dan and I got separated and I eventually began dating again, I said, you know, I definitely do not want children. This is not in my future. And I went back to her, and she wouldn't do it. She wouldn't sterilize me. So I went to about 6 or 7 other OBGYNs over the course of a year, and none of them would give me permanent birth control, which was really frustrating. And lo and behold, a few months later, I found out that I was pregnant because my IUD had failed. I had been dating somebody who lived in California at the time, but we had recently broken up. And in Texas, HB2 had just happened, so it was the spring after HB2. And even though I was very lucky and lived in Dallas, where we had yet to see clinic closures, eventually we did lose a clinic, but until at that point we hadn't. Because of the influx of patients from around the state where they had absolutely nowhere to go, there was a kind of a backlog of patients in Dallas. So I was about 13 weeks along when I found out that I was pregnant. Because I had an IUD and didn't really have a regular menstrual cycle, I really didn't know. And when I called the clinics in my area, the soonest I could get in was 2.5 to 3 weeks later. I was waitressing at the time. It's not the kind of job where you have PTO. I was very concerned that if I made it to my initial appointment, because in Texas there's a 24-hour mandate, so you have to go in, have a sonogram, and then come back 24 hours later for your procedure. That wasn't 2 days off in a row was something I hadn't had in a year. And I thought, well, you know, if I do an appointment 2.5 weeks out and then miss my next one, and it's another 3 weeks, we have a 20-week ban. I might not be able to get an abortion. And that really, really frightened me because I knew that I didn't have the resources to parent, nor, you know, was it something that I ever saw in my future. And I'd been doing the things that I was supposed to do to prevent that from happening. So I ended up contacting my partner in California, and I had an appointment. They could get me in as soon as the very next day. It was pretty rough. I had to take out a really high interest payday loan to be able to get on that plane. Put me in debt, kind of a spiral that I didn't get out of for about 2 years, to be honest, robbing Peter to pay Paul, taking out multiple payday loans to cover the other one. But I also know how incredibly lucky I am to have been able to do that at all. In Texas, the places that are the most affected by the lack of access are also vastly under-resourced. You know, people in the valley can't just hop on a plane and fly 1,500 miles away and get an abortion. I'm very, very privileged to have been able to do it at all. But also, I shouldn't have had to. Not only, you know, is abortion healthcare that is my right, but I had been making very cognizant choices for myself and my body that medical professionals in my state weren't listening to and were trying to dictate, my future. If I would have been sterilized when I wanted to be sterilized, I wouldn't have had to have a second abortion. I would have never been in that situation. So it was really hard for me. And now I think that, my friends in Seattle are faced with the realization of what I faced 3 years ago. We've been fighting this fight in Texas for a very, very long time. And I hate that the rest of the nation is feeling that pressure now, but, the work has to be done.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So what would you like our legislators and president to know as they're making decisions about abortion rights?
I think one of the biggest things for me is that you look at who you see in the media talking about abortion, the stories that people are telling. Even, I have spoken out in front of the Texas state legislature about my abortion in order to kind of, show the face of what abortion really looks like. But the majority of people who they see are people who had wanted pregnancies that had to terminate later because of fetal abnormalities, or people who had abortions and regret them and see them as something that's very tragic. But that's not really everyone's stories. When 1 in 3 women are going to have an abortion in their lifetime, the stories that you see, the human faces that you see, are all very, very different and unique. And, some of us, I think abortion is the best thing that ever happened to me. It gave me a future that I never would have had. And it's the most unselfish thing I've ever done, because knowing that you don't have the capacity to parent and not choosing to bring a child in the world that you can't take care of is, something that isn't something that you don't think about, right? I was thinking about my child when I had both of my abortions. I knew that it was the right choice for me and for anybody that I brought into the world. Our stories are all very different, and they're all equally valid. One is not more important than the other. This is our right to do. And when you take it away, you're not only affecting us, but you're affecting the children that, you're forcing people to bring into the world, while you're also eliminating resources for people to be able to provide for their families. It just doesn't make any logical sense.
Thank you so much again, Candice.
And thank y'all for having me.